So I'd like to start just by reminding ourselves of the session, the points and questions we're going to be discussing in this session, which is as follows. Audiences for online events during the pandemic have been uneven and often very disappointing, but the potential is unlimited. How can we grow online audiences for festivals and outdoor events, including targeting people who cannot attend in person due to geographic remoteness or because of health conditions or caring responsibilities? And how can we use online events to develop our brands and increase the number of events we produce annually by also producing online events? To help us find some answers together, I'm delighted to welcome our panelists. We'll bring them in one at a time because it's just more accessible for people using the interpreter to minimise the number of pictures on screen. But each of them will take 10 minutes or so to tell you about their work and their recent online experiences, and then we'll open it out to discussion and have all the panelists on the screen. So first, we're going to hear from Pax Nindi, Global Carnival Consultant, about his experiences with Hackney Carnival at home, which he also ran last year. Then I'm delighted to welcome Rebecca Monks, Communication Manager at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society, who's going to tell us more about how parts of the Fringe Festival were delivered online this year. And then Dr. Adrian Leguina, whose name I'm probably pronouncing wrong, and Dr. Richard Misek from Loughborough University and the University of Kent are going to tell us about their fascinating Arts and Humanities Research Council project on digital access to arts and culture during the pandemic and the future implications. So I'm delighted, first of all, to welcome Pax. Richard, if you want to switch your camera off for now, then as I just explained to the others, it's just a little bit easier for the access. So I'm going to spotlight you, Pax, and switch myself off.
Hello. Yeah, and could I share a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, you should be enabled to do that. Is the share screen button green at the bottom of your screen?
Yes.
Good.
It is green, but it's not showing. Hold on. It's not showing any of my files or my space. Did you request me to do a video or something earlier?
I think you said you were going to share a PowerPoint, Pat.
Yeah, I am sharing a PowerPoint, but when I logged just now, it asked me if I wanted to accept my video, and I said no because it was a PowerPoint. So I don't know whether it's to do with that.
I don't think so. But if anybody on the panel or in the audience knows more about Zoom than me, I haven't had this problem come up before.
Yeah.
I think that might have been accepting whether you were happy to be recorded, not what you were putting up.
But at the moment when I go share to share my my PowerPoint, normally to show me everything on my desktop, it's not showing anything at all.
That's very, very strange.
It's giving me all the option of PowerPoint and so on, but they are all not active. Open system preference, allow Zoom to share your screen. Hey. I don't know if it's
I have a feeling, Pax, that every time Zoom updates, you end up having to update these little extra bits again.
all right.
Don't worry, we've built in plenty of time for this.
Oh, that's
Zoom
I'm
makes
not
everything easier, and then it throws in these extra time.
Zoom app chat allowance share screen. Okay, hold on. Share automatically when I share application. Yeah, it's ticked that I share my screen, so I don't know what's going on. I'll try again. Share the screen. No, it's still blank, completely blank.
Would you rather that I try to bring somebody else in, Pax, and you have...
I think bring somebody else. Security.
Who would be kind enough to volunteer to go first instead of Pax? If you want to switch your camera on and let me know. But this is a great example of exactly what we've been talking about and will be talking about this afternoon. It's glitchy. It's not perfect. You know, it's an amazing system doing wonderful things, but it's not like being able to switch on a multi-million-pound broadcast operation.
Yeah, I personally haven't had problems.
Put her hand up. I'm really sorry, Rebecca. It's not coming through. I didn't see that because it's not coming up on my main screen. If you're willing to come on now, Rebecca, just switch your camera on.
Ooh, there we go. Hi.
So I'm going to take you off for a little bit, Pax.
Okay. And then I'll try to set it up, yeah. Oh.
I'm not even high-tech enough to attempt a PowerPoint, so hopefully just me ranting on for a little while will be okay.
That'll be wonderful, Rebecca. I'll leave you to introduce yourself, but I'm not very far away just because I've switched the camera off. It's really great to have you here. I often find, particularly in the last 18 months when I've been doing remote panels in Scotland, that the Scottish experience in terms of inclusion is actually very, very different. So although we're focusing on the online experiences, I'm also aware that I can go and do something like a panel in Glasgow, and things like audio description and captions and interpretation, which is seen as a bit of an added extra in England, is absolutely kind of taken for granted in Scotland. So I think it's, you know, doubly valuable to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So yeah, I'll just dive right in. So I'm Rebecca. I'm the communications manager for the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society. So just to give you a bit of background on the Fringe, the Edinburgh Fringe is the biggest celebration of arts and culture on the planet. So it takes place for 3 weeks every August, and artists and performers take to hundreds of stages all over the city to present shows for everyone, basically. You've got big names in the world of entertainment and unknown artists looking to build their careers, and the festival pretty much caters for everyone. So we've got theatre, comedy, dance, physical theatre, circus, cabaret, children's shows, musicals, opera, music, spoken word, exhibitions, events, you name it, it happens there. And this year we're celebrating our 75th anniversary, which is very exciting. So I am from the Fringe Society, and the Fringe is quite a unique event in that nobody programs it. So nobody says who can or can't appear. It's quite anarchic in that way, quite exciting. If you have a story to tell and a venue willing to host you, you're welcome. But the Fringe Society is the custodian of the Fringe's values. So we were set up in the 50s by a group of artists, and our purpose is to support artists that want to attend and to support audiences that want to come and see that work, and to make sure that we safeguard that open access principle. To give you some idea about the scale of the Fringe, in 2019, we had 3,841 shows in the programme. And to put that into perspective, if you wanted to sit down and watch them back to back, it would take you 8 years. And in 2020, we had to cancel for the first time in 73 years. That was our first experience of experimenting with some online work. We had to pivot very quickly. Usually our programme is open from January and we announce it in June. It was on the 1st of April, April Fool's Day, that we decided that we had to make that call and say that the Fringe couldn't go ahead. And so, you know, April to August is quite a short time to kind of drastically reimagine the programme. But we did so, and our focus was on kind of supporting artists that had lost so much income and so much work, and making sure that the spirit of the Fringe wasn't lost from audiences' minds as well. And so what we did initially was we had a strand called Fringe on Friday, which was basically, I describe it as a digital cabaret fundraiser. And so it was a digital show that streamed every Friday and showcased a snapshot of the festival across a range of genres, primarily comedy, cabaret, dance, and music. And every show had 9 different acts, went out at 9 p.m, and the tickets cost £9. It was really important to us, even when we were still kind of like developing our online offering, we didn't undervalue it. You know, there's a big argument for, I can watch online work on YouTube for free, why should I pay? But our argument is artists create this work, it's valuable, it's exciting, it's new, people should be paying for it in the same way they would pay for a live show. Because we were very aware that we wanted to support artists who'd lost their income, we set up a system with Crowdfunder whereby any artist or fringe venue that was registered with us in 2019, 2020 could sell tickets to this event, and they could keep 100% of the profits from any tickets they sold. So we didn't make a bean from this, but it was important for us to kind of make sure that other people were receptive to the value of this work. I think we ended up raising about £250,000 towards the end, so it was quite exciting to be able to do that. And as we got further on through the year, what we found was that a lot of our partner venues that, you know, do program and produce work were kind of getting more and more motivated to go into the online space. So by August, we had around 300 digital fringe listings registered by the artists and creators themselves on our website. And some of those shows were just like incredible. So we had a one-person show about an opera queen. We had a virtual disco for babies. We had a soundscape of a Stirlingshire sheep farm in a field, a dance-a-thon, an online musical. It was really exciting that, you know, that kind of random spirit that makes the Fringe so brilliant, that wasn't lost in the online space at all. What we did get was a lot of learning from 2020. We moved quite quickly. We were quite hasty. It wasn't as developed or as accessible as it should have been. I think we all were very keen that if we were going to roll that out into 2021, that we do it properly. And so one of the kind of early decisions we made from a communications and marketing point of view was we need to make sure that we treat online and in-person work as exactly the same value-wise. We don't pretend that they're the same product. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I can kind of walk you through what we did online in 2021 and how we did it slightly differently. So we retained that kind of principle of just because it's online doesn't mean it has to be free. Like, you know, artists work very hard to develop this work and it should have a value to it. We found that the average ticket price for fringe shows online in 2021 was £5.80. So that was, you know, really good to see people were actively kind of valuing their work in that way. There were two kinds of online events that we hosted as part of the Fringe. The scheduled and on demand. So scheduled shows, audiences could buy tickets the same way they would any kind of traditional in-person event with a dedicated start and end time. And on demand shows you could watch and buy the tickets to watch at your leisure. What was really important to us was that we found it quite difficult to rely on external platforms like Zoom or Vimeo, YouTube, to have that kind of accessible, any kind of quality accessibility in it, basically. And so we went about building our own platform. So we worked with our creative agency to build Fringe Player, which was built into edfringe.com. And this enabled our artists to kind of upload their content directly to this. And it had all the kind of Fringe brand power and marketing behind it, which gave it a little bit of excitement and legitimacy. It was less about just sharing a link to some work, and it was more about this is part of the Fringe, and you can see it with all of our kind of collateral behind it. But crucially, we made sure that all of our online shows had captioning built in, and that captioning was kind of robust and worked well. We found that when we were relying on Zoom and Vimeo, etc., it was very patchy, and that just is not in line with our policy at all. What we were kind of really encouraged by was the volume of online shows. So in 2021, we had 924 shows in total, and 414 of those were online. And they ran across the genres, you know, comedy, music, theatre, dance, they were all in there. We were also really pleased with the outcome of ticket sales. So as I mentioned before, like one of the things we were quite keen to do was to ensure that we weren't just sending links out to online shows, that people were having that same kind of experience, that booking experience that they would get from any Fringe show in a normal year. So all our shows were ticketed, and we sold 14,500 digital tickets worth a total of £84,000 to the artists themselves. One of the things I mentioned earlier that we took into this year as a guiding principle was to make sure that all of our marketing and comms placed online and in-person work on an equal footing. The timing of kind of trying to organise the Fringe and programme the festival itself or to accept applications for the festival rather, was quite tricky in that restrictions kind of lifted loosely in Scotland around June. And so people were kind of warming towards the possibility of doing in-person work, which made all of the online planning we'd done in the first half of the year from kind of January onwards, it did make us panic a little bit. Will people engage as much with online work if suddenly they're able to go out and attend in-person events? We've never been in this situation before. We had no way to measure it. And the Scottish Government very helpfully lifted all restrictions on the third day of the Fringe. So, we really were kind of in unknown territory with how our marketing would translate into ticket sales and to audience numbers. But what we did decide to do was that we would never treat online as an alternative option. It was always like, you can buy tickets for this in-person show and this online show. And so in all of our marketing and comms, that was weekly email bulletins to the public, daily social campaigns, a very intense digital advertising campaign that got over, I think it was 94 million impressions throughout August. It was online shows and in-person shows. And we did a lot of kind of specific online promotion as well, including a trailer, which was specifically about like how you can engage with online work. And what we saw was that our audience really responded well to that. So at the end of the Fringe, we do an annual audience survey, which asks people how they engage with shows, what they liked, what they didn't like. This year, we kind of polled them about online performances, and the results were so encouraging. So 63% of our audience agreed that without online performances, they wouldn't have been able to experience the Fringe this year. 67% agreed that the online performances allowed them to see things they wouldn't have seen in real life. And 65% said they were interested in watching online events in the future. So that was all hugely encouraging for us. But interestingly, and this isn't mutually exclusive, 90% of those respondents, including those that had previously agreed to those above statements, said that online events were not the same as in-person performance and shouldn't be treated as a substitute. And I think that's one of the ways that we agree. And what we found quite interesting with our marketing strategy is give them the same value and weight, but they're not the same thing. And actually, online performances have so many advantages that need to be highlighted. So, open access for one, it removes barriers around physical access to events. They're more sustainable. It offers an alternative to travel. They're global. Anyone can take part in the Fringe from around the world for the first time, really. And that's incredibly exciting. And you're less tied into a specific venue. You've got a lot of digital presentation platforms that you can choose from. And what we found was, I think the mistake we made in 2020 was maybe saying like, this is the Fringe for you this year. Like it'll be just like when you go to to this kind of cellar bar and you see a comedy show, it'll be just like that. Well, it isn't. It has a lot of benefits and it has a lot of differences and a lot of similarities. But once we embraced that and started saying, actually, you don't have to spend £5 on a plastic glass of warm beer. You can sit in the comfort of your own home and engage with things on your time scale. Tapping into the differences as positives was a useful kind of exercise for us to do. Will definitely be something we're taking into the future. And just to kind of finish a little bit on the note of access, like it's hugely positive online events for access, but I think one of the things we're very aware of is that this isn't the job done. It's not like, oh, we have online events, so that's fine. We have to keep working to ensure all events year round are accessible as possible, and that work is never done. And so this is a great kind of another avenue for us to explore and to work on and develop. And we've learned so much from 2021 that we want to build into our strategy in the future. But I'm excited to see this as the start of a journey rather than a fait accompli. So yeah, I think that's kind of everything on Fringe to share, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I think what we'll probably do, Rebecca, is wait till everybody's presented and then we'll have questions individually as well as together, because I think that was just fascinating though. Thank you so much. And with such a kind of huge variety in the Fringe, I can only think that you've probably got more experience about what works and what doesn't work than any other arts organisation in the UK at the moment. I mean, I was very, very fortunate to take part in the Fringe in 2009 and actually had funding to bring my exhibition there. So I've got a really good sense of what the Fringe is like. And as you say, you can't replicate the same experiences, but you can have different ones. And that's what we'll come on to discuss in a minute. Emily, can you take Rebecca's spotlight off and ask and to give Pax permission to put his video on and spotlight Pax, please? And then if you just want to switch your camera off, Rebecca, till we come back to the chat.
The host says spotlight your video for everyone. Okay, I'm going to give up on the sharing of my PowerPoint. On here, it's not allowing me to go anywhere, not to share it. So I think I'm just going to go ahead as it is, which is a shame because I did a lot of stuff. With Carnival, it's always easy to talk with visuals rather than with your mouth.
Do you think, Pax, we could maybe put the PowerPoint up on our website afterwards so that people
yes.
have access to it?
Yeah, because it's got quite a lot of visual stuff that sort of states what I'm talking about. So anyway, without further ado, is that okay if I just continue?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So anyway, in terms of Hackney Carnival, I come in and work in as a consultant, artistic creative director. I've done this for 7 years until COVID kicked off. Just before COVID, I decided I was going on tour, so I decided I wasn't going to do it. And then because I wasn't going to do it, they had to advertise the job for other people. And then when I realized COVID had happened, I came back demanding my job back. And by then, we ended up being 4 people organizing Carnival instead of 1. So those are what we ended up being curators, 4 of us. So we did all the curation. So 2019, we normally start with a group consultation. So we do a consultation with all the people involved in Carnival. And then once we finish our consultation, then we can plan what we want to do. So I did a review of 2019, what had been successful and what had been not successful. And then we started building now up onto the live streaming. And in order to do the live streaming, we wanted to get all the groups to make their own videos. This is in 2019. And Hackney Carnival, the money we're supposed to use for Carnival is what we use now to commission the groups to create their own videos. And my organization, Global Carnivals, was also commissioned to go and train because there's a weakness in terms of people understanding new technology. And I think that's been sort of the advantage of doing these lockdown things, because now people who are scared of computers are now using computers. So my organization helped with the live streaming. And then I set up the live streaming here where I am right now, which is my studio. And then all the live streaming was happening here. So the contents were the videos that people made. And then also I researched all the past carnivals. Then we showed that. We also had live streaming of the sound systems, which we did as an after party. So most of the 7 sound systems that take part in Hackney, they also took part, but more as a live streaming thing. So we went into partnership with the Real Rebel Radio, and then that's why we did all the live streaming of the live bands. We incorporated them in the live streaming that I did on the day. Prior to that, we also ran a competition, something that I sort of introduced called Soccer Challenge, whereby I wrote this track and then anybody could sing to that track, dance to it, send it to us, and that became the competition. So we did that as well. Some of the people who don't usually take part in Carnival started being involved with the Carnival. So those were the plans for 2019. And that was successful as it was. Sorry, I'm actually doing my PowerPoint presentation here. And then what we did now is 2019, when we finished, we sat down and looked at it and said, okay, what was successful, what wasn't successful? So the group consultation are very useful in these things. So following the group consultations, we knew exactly what we had done wrong and what didn't work out. And as everybody knows, we didn't know whether 2021 was going to be also another lockdown or it was going to be us back into the streets. And also Hackney Carnival is run by the local authority, and then people like us are commissioned to do stuff. So when we did the carnival, the 2019, the 4 curators, one of them came with a health and well-being video. I came up with this live streaming thing. That's what we ended up doing. And another 2 of them, Deb Mullins and Manuela, they came up with an idea of doing the Spirit of Carnival, which was like a website. So that was 2020. Come to 2021, we did the same thing, sit down, look and see what can we do. And then it became much more expanded than before. Because we ended up with actual outdoor activities as well this particular year. God, I feel funny jumping all these images that you can't see. Okay, so in 2021, what we did is started with the council announcing that Carnival again is going to be online. And then the groups that we consulted were also encouraged now to apply for another chunk of funding that was created for them to apply. This funding allowed them to be filmed by my crew. It also allowed them to take part in some of the street arts activity, which I'm going to talk about. It also allowed them to do some visual arts. It also allowed them to take part in the gala. So one of the curators suggested a gala in Hackney Empire, which we ended up doing. One of the curators suggested a flash mob, which was done outside the town hall, but incorporating schools and other people that we normally work with in Carnival. And then the other curator suggested some visual arts whereby they worked in schools with the elders and so on. And then the artwork from there was what was going to be going to the buildings, but there was some technical problem in doing it. So it's something that's going to continue later on. And then I also came up with the soccer challenge again this year. And what happened with the soccer challenge is you do have people who come and take part from all over the world. So that means really in reality, we started engaging now people from abroad as part of the carnival. So the soccer challenge was very successful the year before and this year, and also most of the people taking part were from Ghana, Kenya, and different places in Europe. Also the live band that take part in Hackney, we don't leave them behind. We commission them to film them performing indoors. And then we use that film, which is what we show as part of the program, of the live streaming program. And as I said, the sound system this time around, we did not do Real Rebels. We did what we call it, mixed cloud. So we got all the DJs. We also commissioned them to do performances. And if they can't record it themselves, we bring them into my studio and we do some of that recording here. And then that all is what we ended up doing. Right. So these are the things that we ended up doing. But I think what I would say, I think some of it has already been mentioned by Edinburgh Fringe, that, you know, there is, just because it's online, you can't really charge. But then the difference between Edinburgh and us is that Carnival, we never charge. It's always free. So when we went online, actually, we ended up with a bit more thing like, listen, we are doing this online, it's new to us, so you're going to have to cover thing. But we never managed really to get anybody to pay for anything online. So that's been a challenge. But what I would like to say is the advantages of having done it this way is that there is people, elders who don't want to go to Carnival because they are scared of the crowds. And then you also got religious people who think that there's alcohol at the Carnival. Then you also have people in wheelchairs who normally gets pushed and battered about in Carnival. So we found out that most of those people ended up being some of our key participants in the Carnival, because now they've got an opportunity to see Carnival from their living room with everything that you can see. So that's been really some of the advantages that we ended up benefiting, apart from other things as well, like, the signages and so on. When people are doing Carnival, they pass through, it's up to you to make up the story. And sometimes I find that very, very frustrating. But when I'm showing live streaming a Carnival here, I could actually talk about it, because in Carnival, this judge is talking about it, but only minority would hear that who are near the judging point. Anyone else I want to know what the whole theme is and so on. So we had the advantage of actually describing all the things that you see in live streaming and so on. So that's what we ended up doing really in terms of the live streaming in Hackney. And I had a few pointers, but I'm just going to leave it because they make sense if you're seeing on the bullet points. So I think that is Hackney Carnival at home.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Pax. And what I suggest is that when we open this up to discussion. Emily, if you can just take Pax's spotlight off, please. That we come back and hear your recommendations, then Pax, I'm absolutely sure they'll make sense even without the visuals. So now I would like to welcome Adrian and Richard to talk about their research. Emily, you may need to just give permission to switch camera back on to Adrian. I have no idea why, but that's just how Zoom works, and we're just rolling with the way that it goes. Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. So it's great to meet you both at last. I was so excited when I first read about your research in The Guardian, and then I was thrilled that you were able to come and contribute today. And like I say, we'll be putting these recordings up. Everything we do, one of the things we've learned as an online festival is you can actually get over this idea of if you're not available at a particular time on a particular day, you can't access something, because you can. You might not be able to contribute actively in the same way, because again, what we found is that being able to contribute and being genuinely live are kind of key components. But we'll come on and discuss that. Without further ado, I'm going to get Adrian and Richard to introduce themselves and their work. I'm hoping if you need to screen share that it works. It's worked for some of us, but it hasn't worked for Pax. And again, that's the kind of thing we can discuss a bit later. You know, is the technology always going to be a bit clunky? How much of a problem is that? Or is it actually marvellous considering what it's actually managing to do?
Okay, so I think I'm going to talk just for a few minutes, then hand over to Adrian, and then he'll hand over back to me for a few more minutes. So my name is Richard Misek. I'm a middle-aged, blonde-haired, glasses-wearing male, wearing a kind of turquoise shirt and black cardigan. I always wear a cardigan because I think of myself as a hipster, but that's about 20 years out of date now. So I'm just going to introduce our project first. So I'm the primary investigator on an Arts and Humanities Research Council project called Digital Access to Arts and Culture. The project, I mean, basically looks at how online activity in particular can improve access and inclusion to arts and culture. It was a project which I first applied for just as the first lockdown started, when everything was going online. And I think my initial thought was that just going online would lead to automatic access and inclusion benefits that we couldn't previously imagine. And the more time has gone by, the more we've collectively realized in our group that that's actually not necessarily the case. And so overall, and Adrian will talk a bit more about this, the top level finding has been from various research groups that online online replicates in person. So the kind of audiences overall who engage with arts and culture online tend to quite closely mirror the overall audiences that engage with arts and culture in person. And so our project, in light of this, our project has focused more on the micro rather than the macro, looking at how online can work rather than necessarily on how it has worked so far, or at least looking at best examples of how it has worked to try to anticipate best examples of how it could work in future. And so we're doing a range of different things. We're doing case studies of various online best practices from arts organizations across different sectors, theatres, orchestras, galleries, museums. We're conducting surveys and doing some analytics work to try to quantify precisely what works best and where the wins have been, and what needs to be done to get those wins. And we're also doing interviews with artistic directors and digital managers at arts organizations to try and gather knowledge and then share knowledge about innovations that they've carried out. And I think the top level, which maybe Adrian will talk about a bit more, is that there are sort of immediate wins from going online and potential wins. There have been immediate, almost automatic wins, and online has benefited, in particular, geographically remote people, markedly, older and vulnerable audiences, and disabled audiences. But online also has a broader potential for around widening audiences, so having, increasing the overall number of audiences, deepening audiences, so creating kind of more two-way engagement between arts organizations and the stakeholder groups, and diversifying audiences. And the wins in these fields have been generally more limited. And they remain more latent. And one issue which I think is quite very interesting, listening to Rebecca talking about the Edinburgh, about the idea of kind of substitution or online being seen as a not as good version of live, because that seems to be one key challenge, is sort of overcoming the sense that online is a bolt-on or a derivative of things that you do live. And I think there's a huge amount of work to be done in kind of overcoming that and thinking about the kind of particular digital affordances of online. One of the biggest successes we're engaging with is a festival by an organization called Tank Museum, which ran virtually last year. And instead of the physical festival would maybe get 5,000 people or so, the virtual festival was run inside the game engine and got an audience of about 1 million. And so we're sort of looking at ways in which online programming can not fall into the trap of being seen as a not as good version of live. What is the extra value it can offer? And at this particular moment, I have to say, I've just come from an interview about an hour ago with a theatre company. I'm sensing a lot of focus on live performance now among arts venues that just aren't so feel like digital is competing with the live offering and are stepping down digital, and that makes me quite anxious. And we were talking to this one arts company, or just interviewing this one arts company who had a really great a live show, which they also turned into a really great video, and they went around receiving houses or theatre venues with the video, and basically most of them didn't want it. And a few programmed it and buried it, so they didn't really adequately advertise it. And so the result was that very few people actually saw the online version of the live show, which can result in a sort of vicious cycle, because of course then this can be seen as evidence that online doesn't work, nobody's interested in it, and so theatres will be even less interested in creating online content. So before I hand over to Adrian, I would say I think there are two huge mountains to climb around developing accessible online content. The first is simply to make the argument to arts organizations of all scales in all sectors that online is important and should be integral to their work, and to prevent them from backsliding on many of the advances that they've made over the last 20 months. And the second mountain to climb is actually in the detail of how to present content online and how to ensure that it can achieve its full accessibility potential. And that is going to require, I think, a lot of experimentation, a lot of commitment, and a lot of resource. So I'll hand over now to Adrian to give us a little bit more detail about some of our findings.
Thank you, Richard. So, well, first of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Adrian Leguina. I'm a lecturer at Loughborough University, and following Richard's model of presentation, I'm on my very late 30s. I have thick glasses, thick beard, and I'm originally from Santiago, Chile. So I'm going to go through my notes because I think that I probably have a lot to say, but I'm going to try to do it in as condensed way as possible. I'm the person working on the statistics and survey analysis of audience data. I'm gonna only mention two numbers. So I want to focus more on reflection around some of our findings and some of the things that Richard already mentioned. So, well, first of all, it's a known fact that online access to arts and culture reproduces structural inequalities also present in the physical world. So, among recent reports, for example, The Guardian highlights a reduction of approximately 50% of online programming across UK theatres, which of course has major consequences for disabled audiences, among other traditionally excluded groups. So similar findings have been reported by Indigo, Vocalize, and the Audience Agency. While Arts Council England has stated that a good opening is an inclusive reopening, it's clear this has not been always the case. Here I have to be honest and to say that, well, these findings are not only a bit depressing, and as someone working on audience diversity and access, right, it never stops to surprise me. It also makes me reflect about the complex relationship between this sector and production of knowledge. So focus on audience inclusion has only grown after those that never struggled to access were forced to stop and find alternatives. But now I would like to concentrate a bit more on the more optimistic bits, which I believe are part of the main key contributions of our project. Geographical distance and physical barriers because of remoteness or difficulties to navigate across venues can be challenging obstacles for many digital tools and platforms. Some of them already available for cultural institutions because of the emergency of the pandemic, offer a unique opportunity to increase access for those social groups traditionally excluded. Research using survey data from our partners from Indigo and a number of cultural organizations revealed that throughout the pandemic, concerns about returning to venues in person have been considerably stronger among disabled audiences. Now it's clear to us that, well, COVID is not only the reason, and mobility, lack of inclusive infrastructure, expectations, or even, well, as Pax mentioned, potentially moral panic around certain types of events are also a key part of the explanation. For example, the proportion of recent online audiences to Bournemouth Symphonic Orchestra, one of our case studies, identified as deaf or disabled, was double compared to live audience. Which is actually quite interesting because we can consider that we are at the moment on a post, or maybe hopefully not in between lockdowns. Similarly, the average physical distance traveled by live audiences venues to Bournemouth Symphonic Orchestra was 11 miles, while the average virtual distance traveled by online audiences was 48 miles. It's interesting how there are not marked differences in terms of the overall quality of engagement across disabled, ethnic minorities, and those with reduced income during the pandemic, meaning that the online seems to be working. Captions, British Sign Language, audio description, and the general flexibility that online access can offer have been praised by hundreds of survey respondents during the pandemic. While there is still a lot of work to do, particularly in terms of attracting and retaining new audiences, we hope, and this is indeed part of our role with Richard, the message reaches those with the power to influence positive change towards the sustainability of inclusive digital access to arts and culture. Now, something important when thinking about live events such as music concerts, festivals, and outdoor events, and here I would really like to hear a bit more about Pax and Rebecca's experience. It's how online can produce experiences of social connection, the experience of being connected and being moved. Survey respondents have highlighted this as missing. And again, sadly, they tend to divide audiences between those expecting to return to venues in person, while which accept limitations and consider online as an alternative or even as a temporary fix, and traditionally excluded audiences welcoming online despite limitations, because in many cases it's the only option to effectively participate in arts and culture. On an ideal scenario, benefits of online access should not only provide access, but also focus on providing equivalent experiences. This can only be achieved with the right support and funding. Feeling communicated through closeness, touch, and synchrony can to a certain extent be replicated via small actions, such as use of chats, emojis, on-screen messages, perhaps even sharing a hot or cold drink while watching the same thing, or listening things together. More sophisticated technologies, including enhanced and virtual realities, can offer great opportunities to make audiences feel like being there. However, it's also important to remember that digital divides and digital exclusion can restrict financially and skill-wise access to those. And this is true for audiences and for cultural organizations as well. Moreover, it's illusional to believe that all technologies are equally suitable across audiences. Just to conclude, and before returning to Richard, I had to be critical again about available evidence and about priorities set by art councils and other influential organizations. Strongly believe that we should challenge the understandings of what is fundable and what counts as legitimate arts and culture. Organizations, those names that do not include words such as royal, national, or have a BBC seal are important, if not more, for audiences that should not be left behind. Now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Adrian. So I know we're breaking in a few minutes, so I'll be very quick. But I just wanted to finish with an example of a festival that I've been interested in this last week. This is actually a film festival, so it quite different from a performing arts or a live festival. But I just wanted to briefly screen share. So this festival is the International Documentary Festival of Amsterdam, and if you can't see the screen share, it's not so important. I'm talking it through, and it attracted my interest last year because its artistic director, Orwa Nirabia, came up with what I thought was a really great quotation. He said, "Could it be that online festivals could offer people an equal seat?" And I love that sense, that metaphor of an equal seat. And last autumn, IDFA, like most film festivals, was entirely online. This year, it's entirely offline. Out of about 200 films, only 7 are online. And I looked at the accessibility page yesterday, and I found this, and this is really interesting. This is far, far more than used to be the case pre-pandemic. So there's obviously been a huge step forward here, and there's evidence of uses of technology to improve accessibility, using apps like Subcatch to improve access to closed captions, with something I hadn't heard of before, EarCatch for audio descriptions, and an app called Mobile Connect to provide amplified sound. And so there's obviously a lot of work going into providing accessibility services here. But when you actually look at how many films have this, it's a tiny number. It's really a small number. We look, low stimulus screenings, there are 3 in the entire festival. And it just struck me that actually what's not acknowledged here is that online can, out of almost automatically, provide certain accessibility solutions. Like almost everything online now has captions. Online viewing can provide a low stimulus environment if you choose it to, can provide amplified sound if you use headphones, and obviously innately provides location accessibility because you're watching from home. And yet the connection isn't made. Accessibility is still very much siloed and anchored in the understanding of it as something that's connected to physical venues. And so I think one learning experience I've had recently is that, accessibility is still seen as a bolt-on, and that online connectedly, online is still seen as something that doesn't relate to accessibility. It exists in a different sphere, and accessibility and online don't really interact, when obviously they do. And this fits into sort of maybe one key discovery that I've made in personally in the project from talking to people around accessibility, and that is that it has to be holistic to really work. It needs to be designed in right from the start. And of course, if it is going to be holistically designed in, then online can and in fact must form a part of that. But this obviously is very expensive. And so another argument I've heard recently is that, accessibility needs to be adequately funded, or funding needs to be earmarked for it. So I was talking to Jamie Hale, who curated the Cryptic Pit Party at the Barbican last weekend, and we're doing some survey work with him based focusing on audiences with accessibility needs. And he suggested that actually accessibility should count for 15% of an arts organisation's budget. And what they get from Arts Council England or Creative Scotland or wherever, 15% should be earmarked for accessibility, and they should demonstrate how they improve accessibility in order to get that 15%, which seems like quite a draconian thing to suggest. But I think there's a lot of value in thinking about that as a real possibility. And I'll just finish by just one final terminological issue that we've had in our project is, are we talking about access? Are we talking about accessibility? Are we talking about inclusion? What do all of these different words mean? Which is the wide definition, which is a specific definition? And the more time goes by, the more I'm feeling that actually focusing our core work on accessibility for people with protected characteristics is crucial. And if you do that, everyone will benefit. If a physically disabled person with the highest access needs can access something online, then so will somebody who's a bit hard of hearing and who lives in the countryside. The intersectionality and the ripple effect of addressing accessibility, I think, is huge. And the recent Vocalize survey suggested that 22% of people who don't have accessibility needs use captions anyway when they look at content online. And so I think thinking forward strategically, I think a key argument to be made is simply that focusing on core accessibility is, essentially and legally required, and that online can and must form a part of this, but also that accessibility is the door that can open to benefit everyone and lead to much broader, more widespread inclusion benefits across arts and culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian and Richard. I'm just desperate to start talking, but you are so right. Traditionally, we take a 5-minute break in every hour, and we split that so that it's a 10-minute break. We've got very hard-working access support workers, Chris Burrow and Julia. So what I suggest is we come back at past. I'm just going to switch my camera and mic off as well. What we'll be doing then is we'll be talking to the people who've just presented until past, and then any panelists that are still with us from this morning will be joining us as well. And in the last half hour, we're just going to look at, what are the next steps, and does that involve funding, and which organisations does it involve, and what can we do, and anything else you can think of. So do stay with us. We'll be back at past. Thank you again so much, Chris and Julia. So I thought we could maybe sort of almost work backwards, which is something I do quite often, and just pick up these points from Richard and Adrian first. I'm looking in the chat, and there's a lot of interest in this 15% figure. I have to say, I can't remember what figure we came up with, but it's certainly at least 15%. Robin was talking earlier today about a series of training sessions that we ran, which culminated in our events guide that we talked about this morning. But I don't think that's unrealistic. And I remember we did some consultancy for New and Word Festival. And again, we were sort of looking at costs. And yeah, it's a significant amount of the budget, you know, and the idea that you can have an add-on thing. Or, I mean, I think the Arts Council announced a £600,000 fund to improve accessibility across England's theatres this summer. Well, how many lifts is that going to put in? You know, almost, you know, it's just absolutely nothing. We were turned down recently for a project grant. We were trying to extend our funding as a national portfolio organisation, and it was all about value for money. What they really meant was that 2/3 of the costs were access costs, because a lot of the costs were already covered, but what we needed was additional workers because we're working online. And, you know, you can plug in a £120 loop and that's access for people who are hearing aid users. But if you go online, you need live captions, you know, proper live captions produced by a human being. So, yeah, I would have thought 15% is a reasonable figure, but for some things it may be more. I'd say 15% for live. I'm not sure whether online it's actually more if you're going to make it properly accessible. I mean, we heard this morning from Queer House Party, everything they do has an interpreter, a captioner, and an audio describer. Now, it really depends what the rest of your costs are. You know, for some people, that's a tiny part of the budget, which of course is why we have to ask ourselves why the more expensive the show, the less likely it is to be accessible. You're probably more likely to get access on the Fringe in a venue that hasn't been created as a venue than you are to a West End theatre. But let's come back to Rebecca. I found your whole journey was absolutely fascinating. One of the questions I think I have probably for everybody is, for me, what really encourages me to take part in an event online is that it's genuinely live. It can have a video element, it can have the audio, it can have the performance on video if there's a Q&A for at least a third of it. But anything I see that's pre-recorded, I think, oh, I must see that. And in fact, on our weekly live stream, Something for the Weekend, we have a roundup. So all of us recommend online activities, mostly free, that people can do without leaving their home. But if it's a downloadable video, I never get around to watching it. I just don't have time. And for me, I would rather have a camera connected to a theatre and see that performance going out as it is to the audience. And I think that's one of the things I found really frustrating last summer, where if you weren't doing anything, you could get lots of money from the Arts Council. And the more work you were doing, the less funding was available, because unless you were about to go bust, you just didn't qualify for the funding. And I think a lot of us whose workload doubled kind of thought, could you not let some of them go bust and actually fund the work that matters? Because one of the reasons these people are going bust is that they've got 19th century buildings and 19th century attitudes and 19th century toilets. And this is in a society where our 21st century toilet standard was set in 1947, and they can't even meet that. But I was saying to the Arts Council, and, you know, continue to say to anybody who wants to listen, what I really want as somebody who's pretty much given up trying to access the West End even before the pandemic, because if you can't use public transport, which is incredibly inaccessible in London anyway, and you need to rely on driving and you need a space behind for a lift, and all of that's got to, then you've got to find somebody who's prepared to work and do that, and then you've got to find out where you can park. It just becomes so difficult. What I really want to do is to be able to log on and have a fixed camera set up that I can mix, where I can look at the stage from the side, I can look at the stage from the stalls, I can look at the stage from the gallery in the upper circle, and I can just mix it as I wish and see, you know, if the cast has been substituted. It's all about, for me, taking part in that live experience. Now, I think there are millions of people all over the world who would love to access the West End and have never been able to afford to. But I also think that those theatres that have been sucking out millions that I think lots of us feel we could have used better. You know, those huge tour buses of American pensioners are not going to come back. You know, they really, really aren't. But they imagine how many pensioners have had a once-in-a-lifetime trip to London would be logging onto the West End every single week if they could get decent online access. So I feel like it's the festival sector, the fringe sector, if you like, the outdoor arts sector, that's really embraced the technology. And yet that technology, first and foremost, should be benefiting the fixed theatres, the fixed venues. I mean, what's your experience, Pax?
You've said quite a lot. I'm thinking my brain is going like whap, 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 whap. Yeah. And I think some of the stuff you say about the live, we started by scheduling videos that are made by the Carnival people. Then we schedule that every Wednesday is this, and then we do all the social media advertising and all that. And then when we finish, there's only like 10 people viewed it. And then when we did the live streaming, the first live streaming up in 2019, with all these people, I mean, I also did a sound system thing, like 10,000 people straight away from Norway. And then I think I should just quickly mention this really. I think earlier, it's either Dr. Leguina or Richard who was talking about trying to use the new technology, the right way, which sort of like engages the right people. And I always had an issue about addressing this sustainability issue in Carnival, but I would never enough money to do it or to send up the message to get the publicity and so on. Boxing Day, I started something called Jankanyu TV with my own money, with my own time, and I trained myself how to do live streaming. And that was live. So what I'll do is I'll present, like, things, how to make a glue gun with cardboard, how to make a guitar with cardboard. I'll present this. And the people in Bahamas are sort of saying, we do that in the Bahamas. And somebody in Trinidad saying, we also do the same thing. Then this conversation, all of a sudden I got more of an audience than me just scheduling this little video there. And this is still going on. I ended up actually having Arts Council officers actually watching this religiously every week, to a point where I actually ended up getting a bit of funding for it, which I did. And we stopped now, we're starting again in December. So there is a certain elements whereby this accessing these things, there's different ways of accessing these things. And also I think the thing about the 15%, I was just looking there. I don't know if some of you know, I worked for the Arts Council for 10 years. And I know how they do their policies and so on, and also how it gets funded. If they say now there is money for accessibility, which is going to be like really any budget they've got, the 600,000 they've got, the majority of people who would access those are people who know how to fill in the application, the Royal Opera House, the South Bank, and all that. Small organizations like, Ju and so on are not going to access that money. So that 15% is still not getting to us. I just wanted to mention that because they can come up with all this, because I did argue with the Arts Council at the Carnival Center when they came and said, we got £350,000 for anybody to apply, come and apply for it. But then you look at it, they want you to have 10% match funding. Now these groups I work with, to get 10% of £350,000, even 1%, they don't have it. So it's okay to say, yeah, we've got all this funding, and then tick the box, yeah, Arts Council's got this funding. But at the end of the day, it's small organizations, individuals who actually end up not really accessing this. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
No, I think it's really important. I mean, one thing I really, really enjoyed with your Hackney Carnival at Home live streams, which I think there were 3 days in total, but I know there was the sound system and then there was the films. You made it live because you had all your live elements. And I think that's one of the things people have said earlier, that one of the key things about delivering online is to take all of the physical experience of theatre or of Carnival. And I ran out of... I was just in admiration, because what would happen is every time Pax did a link, he would have switched hats and switched shirts again. And it was just that, it's those touches of showmanship, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm.
But I also just wanted to pick up on some of the technical issues you had. I was really interested. I didn't realise that you'd used Rebel Radio to do the sound system streaming the first time. What I found accessing the Notting Hill stream for the sound
access all areas, yeah,
and for you, is that you were using different products in terms of apps apps, but both of them had the same problem. At different times, the stream gets thrown off because
Yeah.
the algorithm goes, oh, copyright music, or oh my goodness, you've played that one too many times. And
That-
how do you think it impacts on audiences? Do you think audiences are beginning to understand that this isn't something like I say, you can't switch it on like a multi-million-pound broadcasting operation? Or do you think, I mean, and Rebecca as well, I mean, I don't know what your research shows, Adrian, Richard, that people's expectations in audience are perhaps a little bit unrealistic?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I think also the other thing you just mentioned, the streaming platforms. We started streaming on Facebook and YouTube. And up to now, readers to find YouTube a mystery. You know, I started my little, just as a test, I don't know if any of you seen, but I started this little comedies, which is Memojis. I'm a lion and I talk a lot of rubbish. I get 40,000 views. And then I come up with something really crucial, talking about the environment and so on. 5 views. I'm like, so do I have to be silly in order to get audience? Then I can bring them to my serious things. So that element also, like YouTube is very difficult to get an audience, for me anyway, compared to Facebook. And then the audience in Facebook are different from the audience in YouTube. So it's like trying to balance those two.
I think it's interesting though. I mean, we traditionally always use YouTube because it is the most accessible. You know, you don't have to become a member of Facebook. You can embed it much more easily. But actually, particularly at the moment, it's very, very difficult to get an audience. At the moment, we can't stream simultaneously to YouTube and Facebook. I believe that's coming, but it makes me wonder whether we should be. I mean, it's difficult because our audiences and our participants as disabled audiences, people who don't necessarily speak English as a first language, people who may be older, aren't natural Facebook users. But it doesn't mean that they've been used to using things like the website. I think that one of the evaluations we're doing at the moment is because we've had a drop off in the numbers of people coming onto the Zoom clubs, has that been replaced? You know, now we've all been gaslit by the government into believing it's safe to go out. Or are they waiting? You know, have they got this idea that we're going to come back live in person? Because unfortunately for ourselves, and I think for many disabled-led organisations, that's just not going to be an option. You know, I'm extremely clinically vulnerable. Our chair is extremely clinically vulnerable. I think probably all 3 members of our team are clinically vulnerable. One of them supporting somebody who's extremely clinically vulnerable. You know, it sort of goes on. You know, we haven't left the house since March 2020. Our club's programme leader left her house to move in with her mum to care for her. She's not been home. You know, our chair, my partner, who may be able to join us in a little bit, you know, she's not been home. We're leading very, very different lives to the lives that are represented in the media. You know, the government has never actually had a single conversation with a disabled people's organisation since the pandemic began. You know, it's no wonder they knew so little about social care, because they just ignored all of the co-production structure that exists. And people like myself who've been nice experts and given expert testimony to Parliament and so on, you know, they just don't want to hear from us. So you feel very, very silenced. But at the same point, I wonder if our audience think, oh, well, you know, I'm getting a little bit bored of Zoom, and, you know, in January, I expect we'll all be back at the community centre. But as we were discussing briefly this morning, in addition to COVID, Newham Council have closed all of the community venues in the last few years and closed the Only Arts Centre. So actually, even if we weren't too vulnerable to go back, there's no venues for us to go back to, you know, whereas online is a space that we can create and we can make safe and has all these really important pluses as well. I mean, Clarice said in the chat, digital poverty is a real issue and contributes to isolation. No internet, no access, no data, no access. This is something that has to be tackled. And I couldn't agree more. Julie, our chair, had to hand over this morning's welcome to me because she was running our pop-up poetry club. And we do that as an old-fashioned phone group, because that's the only way for people to get access. But to set up a system where we could just do the old-fashioned conference call people and pay for the calls, took us, well, I think we finally got it on the stream at the end of May. And we were trying to do that from the beginning of, you know, really from the beginning of March, when the writing was on the wall, you know, and then they couldn't cope with the fact that we were going to have to run it off a mobile phone, because again, we've got a team that were never meant to work from home. So it doesn't mean they've got broadband access. We've got people delivering a digital program still using mobile data. So I think we're very aware of those things. But at the same point, I think for Together 2012, what we feel now is that anything you want to do in terms of arts and culture involves some kind of online contact, because it's everything now is about booking tickets online, the sort of withdrawal of box office, withdrawal of cash payments. There's just, they've got to be able to go online. And it's no good to just go, well, I know I have to pay my bills online, but I'll go to the library and the library's going to show me how to do it. Because again, the staff have been cut. And many of them are working from home and none of them actually live in the borough. So that's a kind of added issue as well. So I think for us, persuading people, encouraging people, but critically offering them accessible content. Because I loved your content at Hackney Carnival, Pax, and it was, to me, it really sort of encapsulated Hackney and why Hackney is so successful compared to Newham, because it's about celebrating every community instead of trying to say, well, we should all just be one Newham. And I think people love Hackney because everybody's celebrated and everybody was, really very much able to be represented within the virtual carnival. Clary is asking, and I think we would all ask the same thing, when will we be able to access your report, Richard and Adrian, or is there ongoing research published?
Yeah, we're still working on it. It should come out probably start of February. So we'll have a website up within about 3 or 4 weeks where we'll start to feed through case studies, and then the big report comes early February.
Fantastic. And do you envisage continuing? Is this your area of research? It obviously is an area that you're very committed to. Will you be able to continue taking this work forward, or is it one of those things that's funded? And
no, absolutely. It's the tip of the iceberg, and we've only had 1 year on this, and it's taken us 1 year to realize the complexity of the challenges and the amount of work still to be done. So for me, it's been a bit of a career change, but actually one which I'm just throwing myself into now, because there's just so much further to go. So absolutely, yeah.
I think that's great because, well, for two reasons. For everybody who, whether it's Together 2012 or at the other end of the spectrum, Edinburgh Fringe, for us to continue to invest and believe in what we're doing online, we need the research that you've done. And I think it's been very, very encouraging because, like I say, I have been beginning to think, well, are people just so depressed that they don't want to do anything if they can't go in person? Are they going out in person? What's going on? And to hear those kind of statistics in terms of the take up and the potential, I think is really, really encouraging because, as we've been saying about everything today, none of us have the answers, but we can find some solutions together. I'm wondering, Rebecca, now you've heard what other people have got to say, whether there's more that you'd like to add.
I found everybody's kind of contributions just so useful, and there are a couple of comments that I jotted down just because they kind of sparked a little bit in me as well. One was that point about ensuring that online activity creates moving experiences and generates social connection. And that kind of feeds into what you were saying, Ju, about preferring that live experience rather than a scheduled on demand, because it creates that sense of society and community. That was really important to us when we did those first kind of Fringe on Friday shows. What we wanted to generate was that sense you get when you're in a show, when you're at the theatre, when you're in a venue. You're in it with other people and you're experiencing it with other people. And we had a kind of live chat function that really worked in that space. But what we also found was that live online event generated a lot of problems for us. And one was that our audience is so global that the time scale became a bit of an issue. So, we had people tuning in from America, Canada, China, Japan. And tying it down to kind of one appointment to view became a bit of an issue for us, kind of because we didn't have it, you couldn't download it elsewhere. And that became a bit of a barrier. And then also that digital poverty point kind of ties in a little bit here as well. in that we found that scheduled content was often slightly easier for combating from a participant side. So with Fringe on Friday as an example, we had some kind of really big acts that had kind of big management companies behind them. They'd been successful, they had a little bit of funding, and they were able to invest in mics and quality cameras, and putting that in against somebody that was maybe emerging and didn't have access to those resources. They were filming it on a smartphone. When we put them in a variety show together, it was quite clear that, you know, it wasn't a level playing field in what people were able to produce and charge the same amount of money for, potentially. Because the thing about the Fringe is it's not funded in any way. It's kind of self-producing. So an artist has to break even and break their profit. We don't get any support for it. And so we found that that kind of digital poverty didn't just exist from an audience point of view, but it was also from an artist perspective. And when you put that in a live scenario, it became quite a challenge to ensure that people weren't expecting the same of like an emerging company from Glasgow that they were from this like kind of all singing, all dancing West End company, you know. And that was quite an interesting kind of learning point for us. I can see a question there about, do we see a drop in online attendance when we go back to live? We were really anxious about that because so much of our planning was about delivering a quality, like more robust online program in 2021 and taking that into the future. And then suddenly, like you say, people are like, well, it's fine. The pandemic's over. I can just go back to the theatre. Some factions of society saying that. I'm in the opposite camp at the moment. But that definitely kind of, what we saw was that people still engaged with it and it still mattered. And that was reflected in our ticket sales and in our surveys as well. And that was really encouraging to see.
Brilliant. So what I'm going to suggest is that Pax shares his screen and just takes a few minutes to show us the images that he wasn't able to show us earlier. And then if Clary and Julie and Robin and anybody else who might still be here from this morning switches their cameras on, we'll spend another 25 minutes just looking at where we go from here. So I'm keeping everything crossed, Pax, that it will now screen share for you.
Okay. Let me see. Yeah, now I can share, which is magic. Can you see?
We can. Don't worry about switching cameras off just for this.
You can see, yeah?
Yeah, it's perfect, Pax. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I don't know if it's full screen on your side.
I can see the whole thing. It's not full screen, no, because we're seeing exactly what you see.
Okay, so I'll put it on full screen. How is that?
Perfect.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'll just quickly run it because that was the presentation I was going to show. And these are some images that show you how busy Hackney can be. This is outside the town where we have all the different processions and the different schools, sound systems, people taking part from different cultures. We also actually, with Hackney, we actually really are proud of in terms of how much we care for the different other cultures as well. For example, when people are doing the procession, you know, we don't do the thing of putting a hat who's going to be the first and second. I program in such a way that those who are noisy go at the back, those who got percussion and wheelchairs in front. So I think that's why it's been sort of end up being one of this loved carnival. And these are some of the things I said earlier. And I think one of our challenges has been trying to do toilets and sorting out the route and so on. And it's quite interesting. Last 2 years, we haven't had any issues with routes and, and the toilets and fencing and stewards and security and all that. So the budget has been like quite interesting. And these are some of the images from the carnival. As you can see, that particular group, I think, you know, Ju, you know that group very well. And they do quite a lot of things. You can see this is one of the groups that actually really is very, when it comes to people with special needs, wheelchairs and so on, Para Carnival is one of our best groups, and they always, you know, do successful stuff. And then that what you're seeing on the right was the program for 2019, where we had the Rail Rebel station with the sound systems, and then we had the virtual carnivals and all the different things like that. And then this is all just like really the excitement of the carnival and the mayor. And then this was the virtual for this year. As you can see at the bottom on the right was like Saturday was the live sound systems, which we did on Mixcloud. And then on the right was the virtual carnival itself. And also, Ju, while I'm saying this, I would also like to say to you that when we live stream, we use eCam, and to actual live stream to different platforms, we use Restream. So with Restream, I can live stream straight away to YouTube and Facebook at the same time, no problems. So I don't know which BT the one you're using. And then the sort of like really what we did with that first time was like we had something called the Spirit of Carnival, which was like archiving the carnival, and then the community engagement. All this ended up being a digital thing, but the amount of work we did was very much like quite a lot in terms of just like really where we are. And that was sort of, as I said, we had 4 curators and everybody has to respond for something that they were doing, like the gala, the Spirit of Carnival, the pop-up live stream we did outside the town hall. And this is just like our timeline when we start this planning, start from May. Interesting, most carnivals, like the one I'm running in Oxford, we are planning now for next year. But for Hackney, because it's run by a local authority, we have to wait until the councillors have identified their budgets, then we can do it. So, and so I think that's most of the visuals. So that's what happened on Saturday, the 18th this year, in terms of the sound system. These are all the sound systems that we engaged. And then in terms of the live bands, these are all the live bands that we engaged. And then in terms of the carnival costume groups, these are all the carnival costumes that we involved. So these are all being live streamed at different times. As you can see, this is all the visual thing. So I think I'm done really. I just want to say one more thing, that in terms of showing stuff live, some of us avoid it because if you are showing things live, you have more problems with copyright of music than if it's pre-recorded. And the second thing I was going to say as well is, I think Ju was saying earlier, you more tend to use YouTube. With me, when it comes to Jankanu, most of the people that are accessing me are coming from Africa, the Caribbean, and so on. They don't have enough data to access YouTube, but they can access Facebook. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that is fascinating, Pax. I didn't know that at all.